Alright, time to bring this big guy to life with some paint. I started with a black primer. Nothing fancy, just making sure all the details are covered and ready for color. A clean black primer gives me strong shadows and helps the colors pop. It's not just paint prep, it's the foundation for the whole look. With the primer down, it's time for the real magic. Let's start base coating.
For the skin, I went with Vallejo's Rosy Flesh. So I'm starting the first pass of Rosy Flesh, and as you can see, it's pretty transparent on the initial layer. I'm not too worried though. This paint usually needs at least 2 or 3 coats to really show its tone. I keep my brush slightly damp to help it flow into the muscle texture. As the layers build, the tone starts to show its character. It's a brute's body, built for smashing, not thinking. So I don't hold back from exaggerating the muscle mass, the rough texture, the blunt force that this miniature is meant to embody. This ogre doesn't scheme or speak. He isn't a clever beast. He exists to serve muscle and mayhem. A living battering ram for some warlord's frontline, he doesn't ask questions, he just charges in. As I go through the second coat, the volume of the flesh starts to show. It's thick, it's raw, and it's unforgiving. Just like him, the rosy flesh might seem like a gentle tone at first, but over a broad canvas like this, it becomes something more primal, like meat beneath a scarred hide. I focus on the high points of the muscles to catch more light, building contrast slowly. It's not about finesse here. This isn't an elegant elf or a wise old wizard. This is brute flesh, painted with intention, with weight. And as I finish this pass, the figure starts to feel more real, like it could lumber off the table and smash through whatever stands in its way. To add warmth and depth to the shadows, I go with burnt sienna. I add a touch of retarder to keep it workable longer. A quick mix, and it's ready to apply. With the leather base color ready, I move on to the next layer of detail, his gear. I start with the padded loincloth covering his groin. Then onto the belt, the wide harness strap that wraps across his massive frame. And finally the thick leather bracers just above his wrists. Each stroke is deliberate, burnt sienna toned down with a retarder, allowing the brush to glide and settle into every crease. I imagine these pieces as hardened, sun-baked hide, weathered from years of battle and the weight of this ogre's brutal life. I mix black and snowy blue to get this cold steel gray tone. Now I'm using that same steel gray mix across all the metallic parts. The chainmail skirt, the wide belt buckle, even the eyes. It gives them a cold, worn finish that ties them all together. Then I shift to the base. I'm blocking in the ground where the ogre stands, keeping it muted and rough. This helps the miniature feel grounded, like he's part of the world, and not just floating on a display stand. I mix brown and ochre for a warm, earthy tone. I use it on the ogre's wooden club, some patches of soil, and this horn used more like a battle trumpet than a weapon. It adds a nice contrast to all the colder colors. With all the base colors in place, the ogre's starting to come alive. That wraps up base coating. Next up, shading.
I'm using Reikland Flesh Shade and applying it across all the fleshy areas: face, arms, belly, back, and feet. This gives the sculpt some instant depth and helps bring out all the detail baked into the clay. Next, I'm switching to a black wash from Armored Komodo for the metal parts. I'm brushing the black wash over all the metallic areas. This helps bring out the details and gives it that used, gritty feel. Next, a brown wash for the leather parts. Brushing it over belts and straps, the brown wash seeps into the creases for instant depth. Shading done. Yikes, that didn't go well. Splotchy spots, missed areas, some coffee stains. Can I fix it? Let's find out in the highlights. Now we move on to the highlighting stage, my favorite part. because this is where the ogre truly comes to life. First things first, I need to patch up the mess from the shading phase. Areas ended up splotchier with those dreaded coffee stains. If left as is, these marks can stand out like unblended shadows, breaking the illusion of natural depth. For the affected skin, I go back in with rosy flesh, carefully covering the blemishes. I keep my paint slightly thinned for smoother application, making sure it flows evenly without leaving brush marks. It's a bit like base coating all over again, but here's the difference. I'm leaving the recesses untouched, so the shades remain intact, preserving that depth and definition we worked for earlier. Once the skin's cleaned up, I then turn to other areas that were darkened too much by the wash. For these, I'm using a brown, which is lighter than burnt sienna, to bring those surfaces back to life. The approach is the same: paint only the raised areas and skip the recesses. This helps the leather still read as weathered and broken in, but without losing shape in the shadows. With the base tones restored, it's time to build up the highlights. I start by mixing light brown with rosy flesh to create a warmer, brighter skin tone. This is my first highlight pass. I focus on the areas that would naturally catch the most light: the tops of the shoulders, the bridge of the nose, the knuckles, the tops of the feet. Once the skin's repaired, I move on to the areas that the Grimris brown wash darkened too much, particularly the leather harness, belt, bracers, and padded loincloth. For these, I mix burnt sienna with light brown, bringing the tones back up while still keeping that worn, weathered look. As with the skin, I stick to the raised areas and leave the shadows untouched. On the harness specifically, I switch to a lighter brown mix and use a stippling technique to create small, uneven marks. This breaks up the surface and gives it a convincing leather texture, as if it's been scuffed and worn over time. With the leather done, I move to one of the smallest but most impactful details: the eyes. I apply white in tiny controlled strokes to build the whites of the eyes without spilling over. Once I'm happy with the shape, I add the pupils in black. It's a subtle step, but it instantly gives the ogre a sense of presence. I go in with pure black to enhance the shadows, using a black lining method. This means carefully running black paint into deep creases and between separate elements to improve contrast and make the ogre more readable from a distance. I also brighten the metallic parts for the chain-like skirt. I mix a touch of black with snowy blue to make a cool pale gray, and carefully paint the individual links so they pop against the shaded recesses. I turn my attention to the base. Using a large makeup brush loaded with light brown, I rub most of the paint off on a paper towel, the key to a good dry brush. Then, with quick light sweeps, I catch the raised textures of the ground, bringing out the subtle details and making the terrain pop. With these highlights and shadow refinements, the model now has strong definition, rich textures, and a much more dynamic presence. And there we have it. The ogre is highlighted, detailed, and ready to smash, or at least stand around looking intimidating. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more paint get slapped on more brutes, beasts, and battle-worn heroes, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Until next time, keep your brushes sharp, your paint thin, and your ogres grumpy.